This is Sophie Aldred with The Legend of the Traveling TARDIS.
Hello and welcome, fellow Whovians, to the Legend of the Traveling TARDIS. I'm here. I'm your host for this evening, or this afternoon, or tonight, depending on what time zone you're looking at us from. We are an hour early today because we have a special guest all the way over in the UK, and unlike Candyman, he would like to eventually go to bed. Because this is important, because it's already 10 p.m. over there. So it'll be an hour early today. Christian's not available. Christian still got to do his day walking, day job thing. I'm going to be running the producing and the interview. So we've got our Spilled the Geek tea here. Ramona. Hi, Tom. Hi, Dave. Hi, everyone. Howdy. Everyone's saying hello. That's what I love about this show. You all are so friendly and chit-chatting in the audience. It is absolutely a ton of fun. Watching the show and washing the dishes. That is a reasonable thing to do at this time of day. So I am not going to just be rambling on by myself. We are early, but that doesn't mean I'm alone. Making her triumphant return after much too long of an absence. Michelle, how you doing today?
I'm good. I'm sorry. I just had some family issues and then some work issues, so I'm back now. I missed you all.
We missed you as well. I'm glad you're back, and we're glad things are looking up for you.
Thank you.
Also back, we've got Our Philosophy Is Sean. How you doing?
I'm doing just fine. I'm really excited for this episode.
Me as well. This is going to be an interesting. If people are not aware of your classic Who, you're going to get an education today. Of all the behind the backness. Behind the backness, is that a real? That's not good words. I speak good English. Speaking of good English, Candyman.
Yeah, look at me because I speak real bad English. Real bad English.
That's okay. It was a bad
segue, yeah?
Segue. It's a Christian segue.
It's a Christian segue. Okay.
Like, I can't speak English and it's my native language.
Exactly. No, yours is American. That doesn't count.
The true.
You don't use any U's in your spelling. You weirdos.
Your weird culture of English over there in the US.
And we don't throw on E's where they don't belong either.
Isn't it just official that you guys actually speak English from like this year? Because technically, guys in the US don't actually have an official language.
We still don't. Yeah, no, not officially. It's more by custom that English is.
I thought Trump was making that bill to go through that you actually speak English officially. I don't know if it happened or not. I
don't know. It might be in something we haven't. Yeah, we're got other things to worry about right now.
Yeah. That is accurate.
But it's hot in the UK at the moment. It's about 29 degrees.
Ugh. It is only
centigrade.
25 here.
That's freedom measures.
Yeah.
Which for the Americans, that's 84 degrees, which is hot.
Yeah.
For the UK, yes.
Yeah, it's summertime. Now we don't have Gadget here today. She is off at an event, but she did pre-record a Who Knew News for us. So with some quick birthday. So we're going to run that. And I'm going to, because it's formatted funny, I'm going to go ahead and put this back up. Where is it? We'll put that back up so we're not all just kind of sitting there staring around the corner of her.
Hey guys, it's Gadget. Sorry I can't be there. I'm at the B&H Photo Build Expo 2025 here at the Javits Center in Lower Manhattan, New York. And I did promise Christian I would do the Who Knew News as best I can. So this is all pre-taped. Bear with me. I still may make some mistakes. But today is Arthur Duvall and Jodie Whittaker's birthday on June 17th. Our favorite Rory and our lovely 13th Doctor are celebrating their birthdays today. Yesterday was Carol Ann Ford's birthday, our original companion and the Doctor's granddaughter, as well as many other things that are happening in the news today, especially J. Michael Straczynski of Babylon 5 era is wanting to throw his hat in the ring as the new showrunner for Doctor Who, since it is now in talks with another streaming service and they want to go in a different direction. And this direction sounds more like a Sarah Jane adventure direction versus a Doctor Who adventure direction. But if J. Michael Straczynski could do it, who knows? And then speaking of shows, there's going to be a children's show for Doctor Who preschoolers and everything. And we got a taste of that with Nashuti Envy during their taping of their season 2 when they were traveling through all the TV shows. It's with the CB Babies, if I can pronounce it right. I know the guys are probably laughing right now since I still can't pronounce anything. But that's in works with BBC. As well as there is a toy line out with the 14th Doctor and the Meeps from character-online.com. And you can get a die-cast figure of the 14th Doctor with the changeable head Meeps, or hands, depending on how you look at it and everything. But otherwise, there was not much in the news. And like I said, it's up to you guys. Make it fun tonight. I'm sorry I can't be there. But if you guys are here in New York, I do have the TARDIS. It's in the bag, and hopefully this news is not. So have a good day, guys, and have fun. I'll try to get there as best I can, but I might not get out of here in time to be on live with you guys. So have fun, and I'll see you guys next Tuesday. Bye.
And obviously not able to make it, so we're sad that Gadget can't make it, but Gadget is having a good time, and that's important. And we're going to have a great time, too. We've got an amazing guest for you today. So let's bring him in now. Mr. Michael Herbert, how you doing today?
Oh, well, first of all, thanks very much for inviting me on, and also for an hour. So
no problem.
So I don't fall asleep halfway through.
Like I said, I feel your pain. I've done shows while I've been over there, and it is less than enjoyable compared to doing it in the afternoon, for sure. So you're here because you wrote a book on Malcolm Hulke, who is...
That's right, yes.
Sorry.
Yes, it came out in... we published it in, I think, March, and had a formal launch in London on the 9th of April. So it took me about 10 years on and off to write, researching, as these things often do.
And you did a little bit of writing on him before the book came out as well, right?
Yes, I sort of started life as a sort of mild curiosity, I suppose, to coin a phrase.
Okay.
So I kind of came like I was interested in. I've been watching Doctor Who since the first since an unearthly child, which makes me extraordinarily old. So I was a big fan of it, and I was watching it in the 60s and 70s. And then when he came back again in 05, I became interested in the history of the show. And then I sort of heard vaguely that Malcolm had been in the Communist Party, and as a sort of socialist myself, I was interested in sort of politics and TV drama. So I came across a pamphlet he wrote in the Working Class Movement Library in Salford, which was run by two friends who used to be in the Communist Party, sadly no longer with us. They had a copy of a pamphlet that Malcolm wrote in the late 50s about the Unity Theatre, a left-wing theatre group in London that he was involved with. So then I started to sort of do a bit of research, and a little pamphlet about it was published in 2015. Then I kind of sort of laid it aside and didn't do anything. And then COVID came along, so we suddenly had a lot more free time. I'd also heard that there was somebody else was writing a biography, so there seemed no point in me doing the same thing. But then I heard also that he wasn't going to finish it. No, it never came out. So I thought I would pick up the threads during COVID. And then also did a lot of work on looking through newspapers, and also managed to get hold of lots of material with the help of the National Archives. They ran off his MI5 file, Special Branch file. So he was tracked from the late 40s through to the early 60s by MI5 and Special Branch. So that was a huge and very valuable source of material, because it had copies of letters, records of telephone conversations and things like that. And then I started to make contact with people who'd actually known him, his nephew Anthony, and a number of other people, Corenza Royale, who knew him in the 70s, Rita Carter, and also Elza Dix, Clarence's widow. So they were all very helpful, and so it gradually kind of came together. Also managed to get hold of quite a few of his scripts as well. And so finally I decided to publish it myself. So we did it through a sort of platform called Lulu. And I was lucky to have a good friend, Martin Holmes, who just does a little show in Manchester about vintage television, which I've been on several times, talking about Pathfinders and Space and A for Andromeda and other classics. So he was very kindly designed it all, and then we just put it out and waited to see what happened.
and the reaction has been good? I
think so, yeah. So we've sold quite a few, and people have bought it. So a number of people have been kind about it. So I think we had a nice launch in London, because he died. And when he died, there was no kind of service for him. He was cremated in Cambridge. He was in his last days. He was living in Cambridge, and that's where he was sort of cremated. But there was no service. Terence Diggs sort of says that they went along and just kind of sat around looking at the coffin till Eric Pace stood up and sort of tapped the coffin and said, "Well, see you now, Mac," and they all walked out. So at the launch on the 9th of April past in a London tavern, the Magdala Tavern just around the corner from where Malcolm lived, literally around the corner, we had people came together that I'd met during my research, and a number of people came from Doctor Who, like Sylvester and Sophie and Katie and Andrew. So we had a really nice kind of afternoon, I think, together, sort of celebrating Mac and his work, because Katie says that they always trusted his writing. That's one of the things she told me when I spoke to her about him. So it felt like he was being given some recognition for his contribution to Doctor Who and many other series that he worked on, such as the early Avengers, which perhaps we can talk about a bit later.
Yeah, because he did quite a bit of work, not just Doctor Who.
Yes, that's one of the things I wanted to kind of get across, I think, to people. So I looked at his career as much as I could and looked and tried to watch. Obviously, in the early days of the 1950s, when television was very new, it was done live in a terrifying way. So the actors were in the studio and the cameras were in the studio and the director, and it was all done live. So often there's no record. I mean, we're quite lucky to have a record of, let's think, Peter Cushing in a TV version of 1984, which I think went out in about 1954. But that's quite rare to have a record of a live recording from that period. So it was only when video came along in the late 50s that they started to pre-record and preserve it. Well, preserve some of them anyway. Not everything, as we all know. But so some of his early work has survived. The Criminals, which is one of his first television plays for Armchair Theatre, which is a weekly Sunday evening single drama series that Sidney Newman created on ATV in the late 50s. One of his early ones with Stanley Baker that survived, which I've seen. I mean, his very first television play, which he wrote with Eric Pace, went out in 1958, hasn't survived, although I wish it had, because he's got Patrick McGowan in, whom some of you may know from Danger Man and The Prisoner and so on, and Billy Whitelaw was in it, but that hasn't survived. But a lot of the scripts have, so I was able to read the scripts and try and get an idea of how they would have gone out. And then his Avengers episodes from 1962, 63 have survived, luckily. So I was able to watch those. So that kind of laid the kind of foundation of the book, I suppose, his work. Did a lot of work on radio, which is often not recognized as well.
I know he did a Doctor Who that's lost with Peter Cushing in the late 60s. That's
correct. Yeah, there was this thing about having Doctor Who for children. Although I was kind of thinking, well, hang on, wasn't Doctor Who originally aimed at children anyway?
Yeah.
In 1963, that was the intent. I think the original intent by Sidney Newman was to kind of mix history and science and educate young people, which seem to have moved away from that a bit. But they did, as you mentioned correctly, Dave, did journey into a time, a kind of radio version of Doctor Who, which he wrote, which was aimed at children. Having read the sort of very excellent account of it in the Doctor Who Research magazine, which I commend, Nothing at the End of the Lane. Richard Bignell did a kind of lot of research on it. I have to say that the book is also, as well as my own research, very much sort of relied upon the research done by Richard Bignell and many others over the years in sort of unearthing the byways of Doctor Who's story, which is more complex than people think sometimes. So yeah, they did that. Although the script survived, the recording that actually never did, and then it wasn't picked up. So it's just another kind of cul-de-sac in the history of Doctor Who.
I think there's some fans got a hold of it, I think, and produced it at some point. So
I think so, yeah.
Later, much later recording of the script, just not Peter Cushing.
Yeah. Well, it says, when you look at my notes here, it says that Boris Karloff was under consideration to play the Doctor. That they originally planned 52 episodes, but as you know, it was never picked up.
Yeah.
I think there were 3 radio shows featuring John Pertwee in the 70s or 80s.
Something like that.
Probably know about.
A few here and there. I don't want to monopolize. We got a wonderful panel here. Sean, did you have a good question?
I did. First thing I wanted to say is I wanted to comment that 52 episodes. I mean, my gosh, on modern streaming, that's like 10 seasons, but but so I did have a few questions, but I'll just offer one for now. I saw and this is specifically about Doctor Who. I saw on some of the writing credits on the stuff that he's penned for Doctor Who. I saw that some of the episodes, such as the Ambassadors of Death, there is a note there that says he wrote it with David Whittaker, and I think on that one it was Terrence Dicks involved in that one too. I think so, possibly. But was that because when you watch the official episode credits, it just says by David Whittaker? Were there certain industry standards or practices at the time that prevented that dual credit from appearing on the screen?
Yeah, it's a very sort of complicated history on the Ambassador of Death. So it originally was written by David Whittaker for Patrick Troughton, but obviously then when John came along, it was kind of had to be rewritten. So David Whittaker was struggling to complete a satisfactory script, and Terence interviewed about it, says that it kind of went off the rails. So Whittaker rewrite kept being rejected. So eventually Terence says he kind of went to see Barry Letts and said, look, it can't go on. David's written 3 or 4 versions and they're not getting any better, they're getting worse. He's worn out. So they agreed that Whittaker would be paid in full for his scripts and credited as the sole writer. But other writers would be brought in to rewrite. So they brought in Mac, who worked very closely with Terence. And also the assistant scriptwriter, Trevor Ray, wrote some. So I think the majority of it, the show in the end, was written by Mac. But obviously, as you say, he didn't get the credit for it, but I assume they must have paid him. His agent would have made Harvey Una would have made sure they got paid. So the BBC ended up paying everybody twice, in fact.
For the multiple rewrites.
Yeah. So as I said, David Whittaker kind of burned himself on. And sometimes people get stuck in a rut and writers can't just see their way out of it. So I think one of the things that Mac was very good at was finishing scripts on time. So it was very, very organized. Everyone I spoke to said how well organized he was and very rigorous about getting everything right, down to all the script directions, stage directions, everything else on the script, and delivering on time. I can tell you a story about that if you like.
Yes,
sure. Yeah.
Richard Bates, who was the script editor or story editor on the Avengers, took over Bright, I think, and they just finished the sort of season 2, I think, of the Avengers. So again, that ran every 26 episodes on a nightmarish production schedule. So each Avengers took 2 weeks from start to finish. So they would meet on the Saturday, I think Richard said, and read through, and then start to do rehearsals with the actors, and then they would bring in the cameraman. They would rehearse the very complex, because it was almost like being broadcast live. And then eventually on the Friday night, after 2 weeks of rehearsals, where everyone knew everything perfectly, they would record it in one go in about an hour, and then head to the pub, then start again. So they just finished a run of 26 episodes like that. And then the producer said, oh, well, I think we'll have another season now. And Richard said, well, we got no scripts, to John Price. So they contacted people they could rely on, like John Lucarotti and Malcolm Hulke. And Malcolm produced a script, I think, within 2 weeks. So he was very reliable in being able to deliver and kind of getting what the producers wanted, I think, in terms of the script.
Which is always an impressive skill.
Sorry, Dave.
No, go ahead.
I've heard about the nightmarish production schedule. I've looked up a lot about what was going on behind the scenes, and it's interesting because the Pertwee era, I know, had a little bit of a reduction in the number of episodes, because I know during the Troughton and the Hartnell era, they were kind of, at one point, they were going almost all year round, if I remember correctly. But I know those Pertwee episodes, because they confined everything to Earth and they used unit and everything, they have a very particular quality to them. But a lot of these Malcolm Hulke stories I've seen recently, actually, by pure accident. I just watched Invasion of the Dinosaurs recently, and The Sea Devils, and I think those stories especially have a lot of Pertwee's humor in them. And I guess, Dave, do you mind me asking another question real quick?
Yeah, we'll do one more question, and then we'll go to a commercial break.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure. So
yeah, of course.
A lot of the humor in these episodes, I mean, I think The Sea Devils has probably one of the silliest sequences of all time, with the fight scene between the Doctor and the Master. Was a lot of that, do you think, how much would you attribute to Delgado and Pertwee sort of improvising, and how much of the humor do you think was strictly down to it was on the page when they read it?
I think most of it came from the writers, to be honest. I think and one of the things that Malcolm was very keen on throughout his life, he helped found a trade union for writers, the Writers Guild, in the late 50s with Eric Pace and others. I mean, one of the things he was very keen on is the role of writers being recognised in drama. Because if you haven't got a script, then you've just got a lot of actors sitting around looking at each other, wondering what time the tea lady's coming around. So I think in the beginning, I mean, the motto of the Writers Guild originally, anyway, was a biblical quote: "In the beginning was the Word," because without the words, you've got nothing. So I think obviously the actors, when they're rehearsing, kind of work with the script to maybe ditch bits that don't work or add things with the writer's agreement, but I understand it. Everything that's happened generally wasn't improvised, or would have been improvised or created in rehearsal and then incorporated into the final script, with the writer being paid extra perhaps for extra rewrites.
Right.
But obviously the sort of the personalities, obviously John and Roger were good friends and got on very well. So they might have said, "Well, we're quite enjoying this fight scene. Can you add a bit more to it?"
Right, because that's what I was kind of referring to. Because obviously, a choreographed fight sequence that takes up a portion of the episode that's larger than you would think. That's not something that's going to be improvised. But I know a lot of their quipping, for example, I really enjoy, and I always wondered how much of that was in the script.
Yeah. I think most of it was down to Malcolm. I think really, quite a good sense of humour. If you read his letters, they are quite witty and kind of dryly humorous and sort of self-deprecating and other things like that. And some of that comes across in the scripts, I think.
Nice.
Cool.
Cubicle Creative says, "Hi, Michael, watching from next door."
Oh, right, yes. My friend Ben, who literally lives next door. So.
Excellent. Always good when your friends can watch these things. So we're going to take a quick commercial break. Pay some bills. And when we return, Michelle and Candyman will have some questions as we continue our interview with Michael Herbert. Thank you, and stay tuned to become part of the legend.
Are you a movie nerd? Do you collect VHS, DVDs, CDs, records, and so much more? Are you looking for clothing from 1940s to 2000s? Do you need cosplay or themed outfits? Come to Ducky's Vintage. We have it all for all budgets, located at the Oviedo Mall right off of the 417. Ducky's Vintage, for those born in the wrong decade.
I'm author Mark Muncy.
And I'm author Erica Lance.
And this is Eerie Travels.
Greetings, travelers. Join us as we travel through folklore, myths, monsters, legends, and dark history.
Now, we'll be your guide to the spooky side of reality as we discuss cryptids, paranormal, and all things preternatural.
Sometimes we find the truth is way scarier than fiction.
We're on twice a week on your favorite podcast platforms, including iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, and YouTube.
We have amazing guests from all of the areas of the strange and unusual, including witnesses, investigators, and more.
Yeah, with Erica's curiosity and ridiculous array of pop culture and true crime knowledge.
And Mark's decades of experience diving into folklore and the legends with the truth that's behind them.
Yeah, so join us, travelers, as we take you to the edge of reality, and we'll see you on the other side.
I didn't listen to that voicemail. I'll tear open that letter you send. Don't you tell your friends I want you back. I gotta leave you now and unread, because you've already said those words that switch my heart to dead from loving you. So you'll stay ghosted and I'll stay focused. I'll sew enclosed. The spell stays unspoken. A dark silhouette of a marked man and broken. Right down. I didn't listen to that voicemail or TikTok that story you sent. Don't you reel me in to get me back.
Hello, I'm Sadie Miller, and this is The Legend of the Traveling TARDIS.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to The Legend of the Traveling TARDIS. Speaking of Kitchen Killers barbecue sauce, Christian was at Space Coast Comic-Con this past weekend and had a supply of it and sold out. So it's doing very well. You definitely want to give that a try and use that code TARDIS for 10% off. And let's just take a quick look at some of these comments we've got here. Let me just see if I can find where I left off. Yes, I am a bit of a rant. We're all rambling. That's all we're doing here. Hellos, more hellos, more hellos.
I've never been on a show with adverts before. This is quite novel. I want some of that sauce.
Oh, so does Candyman. Candyman, you'll have to just bulk import it.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna have to get some trade agreements going off between the UK and US.
Actually, a couple of things occurred to me during the break. One is, of course, as I think Sean was saying, how Doctor Who was on all the time when it started. With the William Hartnell era, it was on about 44 weeks a year. So they kind of burned out the actors, I think. So when John Pertwee came along, as he said, they reduced it to 24, I think, shows a year. So that was better. The other thing, of course, was there were no repeats. So if you missed it, when I was a child, sometimes I went on holiday to the East Coast or wherever. If you missed an episode, that was it. There was no video, no repeats. You couldn't watch it again. And obviously, lots of them. But so whether that gives us, I think, maybe a different relationship with the show. Did we concentrate on watching the show much more intently because that was it? So whereas nowadays, if I missed a bit, I can go and watch it again later on, or do catch up or whatever. I'll be all on our phones and reading magazines as well as we're watching at the same time. Because my recollection of the early shows in the 60s is quite clear, including ones which sadly I watched and you never will, like Marco Polo and the Daleks Master Plan. So, so it's a great TV is utterly different in some ways than it was in the 60s, but whether it's better, of course, is a matter of debate.
So did you actually hide behind the sofa?
No, we didn't have a sofa. I think we just had chairs. The middle classes had settees.
Yeah.
I thought we were kind of becoming middle class. My father worked in local government, and then the health service.
Question from the audience here. Timescales was just wondering if MI5 had some records of telephone calls or recordings or anything like that, or it was just paperwork that you got from them.
No, they did. They, as I said, they had bugs in the Communist Party headquarters in London on 16 King Street, which is ironically now a bank, was bugged by MI5. And so all incoming and outgoing phone calls were recorded, and there are records of them in the MI5 file I got, rather helpfully, from the National Archives. So there was routinely transcribed. So every time anybody was mentioned in a conversation, then that transcript goes into their file as well. So it could end up in half a dozen files. But they also had file bugs in the actual rooms that people were meeting in the Communist Party headquarters. And so there's also transcripts of those as well. Typed up by no doubt board, straining to hear what people were saying. Whether the people there knew that, I'm not sure. But certainly, when the Communist Party headquarters were shut down, they found a whole load of bugs around the building.
Did you have to do a public records request or something like that to get some of that?
Ironically, the Malcolm's file was released by MI5 into the National Archives in about 2014, I think it was.
Okay.
On what basis, and a number of other sort of Communist Party figures also have their files released, like Jimmy Miller, Ewan McCall rather. But on the basis on which certain files were selected. And also, it appears that it's complete, but it stopped in 1963. Whether they decided he was no longer worth watching. I mean, he was never a big figure in the Communist Party, Malcolm, but he did belong to it from about 1945, I think, through to the 60s.
Okay.
So it's quite, there's about 500 pages of it. So there's a lot in it. A lot of letters, which is very useful.
Yeah, definitely when you're doing a biography. Sorry, Candyman, I interrupted what you were asking with that question from timescales.
I've completely lost that question. I'm just like, okay, one complete, because I'm completely off topic. Michael, you have no relationship with Frank Herbert for science fiction of June, do you?
No, none whatsoever.
I thought so, to clear it up. And secondly, what made you choose Malcolm over all the other people of Doctor Who? Why Malcolm specifically?
I think it's politics. I'm on the left, and he clearly was. So I understood the world he came from or was part of. I had friends. I never wasn't a member, but I had friends who were in the Communist Party. As I mentioned, Ruth and Eddie Frau, who were in the Communist. Eddie joined it, I think, in the 20s. Ruth joined it towards the end of the war. So they were both very active in it. I knew quite a few other people, and still friends with people whose families, were Communist Party tends to run in families around here in Manchester. Anyway, you have certain families who were all party members.
I was going to say,
I was interested in the politics, and it kind of combined two interests: left-wing politics and Doctor Who. So the kind of marriage made in heaven or wherever you want to believe in.
Because like in the UK, not just for the US, the northern part of England tend to be more Labour or Communist politically views normally, and the south tend to be more conservative. That's just like UK demographic. Would you say that was the same in the 50s, 60s?
Depends what you're talking about. I mean, because obviously London had a very strong Communist Party and strong Labour tradition. And places like Kent, interestingly, because of the miners in Kent, there were mines in Kent, which people tend to forget about. So they were the most left-wing pits in the country. So it really depends which area, but they all tended to be, largely working class, largely pro-Labour, a minority. I mean, the party was never very big. I think at its height, it had about 60,000 members at the end of the war. Kind of benefited from the role that the Red Army played in defeating Nazi Germany. And so people were kind of fed the idea that the Soviet Union was this kind of workers' paradise, which as I mentioned, people realised this wasn't actually true. Nevertheless, it did have, and also the role the party played in the 1930s fighting fascism in Britain, and also the role that people went from Britain to fight in the Spanish Civil War to try and defeat Franco. So the party had prestige, but was never a mass party, and was very heavily monitored, unlike, say, France or Italy, which had enormous communist parties, very powerful parties.
Michelle, did you have a question?
Yes, I do. Okay, so we have certain allegations now that Doctor Who has always been political. Did Malcolm's politics influence his writing in Doctor Who in any way?
In a sort of very broad sense, I think. There are certain themes. He wasn't trying to preach an agitprop party line in any way, I think. But there are broad themes. I mean, I think I've got a quote that's from, I think, Terence says that, he often, that Malcolm didn't trust the establishment, and Barry Letts kind of concurs and said, he always had a kind of political, we didn't mind a message because we like the things to have a point. So there are kind of themes in his work about, relationships between races, because obviously in the 1960s, issues of relationships between black and white people and black and Asian people and white people in Britain became very, very hot topics, particularly after 1968 and Powell's Rivers of Blood speech. and there was a rise of sort of far right groups like the National Front in the 70s. So he sort of says that, as a quote from Malcolm X in an interview where he says that, you know, Doctor Who is political in the sense that it's about relationships between people, and those people can be reptiles. They don't have to be human beings. So in that sense, a broader sense, there are other issues around, you know, colonial exploitation in colony and space. You know, how this kind of, the IMC mining company wants to kind of ransack the planet and is resisted by the colonists. Although the colonists themselves are also sort of taking over the planet as well. Issues around the environment in Invasion of the Dinosaurs, you know, that they want to kind of go back to this. The people involved in the plot, who were the time scoop people, want to take the world back to some illusionary golden age. And also, I suppose, the relations between, in the Faceless ones, again, is about relationships between people. So the Silurians, the Sea Devils, again, it's about sort of complex, really. And I suppose the other broader theme is that with the way that Malcolm writes the Doctor, he's very often trying to bring peace. So he's not a lot of, you know, in the Faceless ones, he kind of goes up, the Doctor goes up to the satellite of the aliens, the chameleons, and tries to broker a kind of peace in the end. Doesn't want them destroyed. And the same with the Silurians and Sea Devils. I mean, the one which is most, in some sense, quite political as well is the War Games, which is very much about war and how ordinary people get caught up in war and just regarded as disposable units by the people in charge. You know, in this case, it's the aliens. Interesting that in the War Games, the aliens never get a name, and they just refer to where they come from as the home planet. So they are, in some sense, just a sort of, and they're also interchangeable. So the same alien is both a Confederate general and a German general. In some sense, it doesn't really matter. They're just generals, and here are the poor people being thrown over the top and being mown down. But that's very black and white, I think, in a sort of moral sense, because the aliens are without redemption, whereas in his other serials, you know, particularly things like Frontier in Space, the Draconians are given kind of equal status with the human beings, aren't they?
And if you'll,
does that answer your question, Michelle?
Yes, and another thing, what came first? Was it the message, or was it the plot line? How would it? What was he like? I'm going to write a story about X, Y, and Z, and give it a sci-fi twist, or am I writing a sci-fi story and I can put something in there that has something to say?
I think from what I've read, and if you read the Making of Doctor Who, which has two editions, so the first one was written by Malcolm, and the second one by Terence. So in the first edition, there's quite a long account of the making of the Sea Devils from start to finish, and it's very clear that they kind of called him in and said, "Well, we want you to do a story about the Navy. And the Navy are going to lend us some hardware, and so can you do a story around this?" So it is quite dictated by, I think, Terence and Barry, gives a very sort of fairly tight idea about it, and then it's up to the writer to go away and come up with ideas. And obviously, as part of that, he would then weave in things that interested him, or sort of, you know, we said that in drama you're always looking for conflict. So because obviously if you've got everyone agrees on screen, it's going to be rather boring for the viewer. So there's a lot of conflict, both between peoples, or between aliens or reptiles and human, but also within those camps as well. So the Doctor is often, although he's part of unit, in the Silurians, he's often making comments about how the military mind is to shoot first and ask questions later. So it's very much opposed to the military idea of solving problems. So, and they're also within, again, the Silurians, you get conflicts between the elder Silurians and the younger ones. The younger ones want to destroy the humans. The elder ones are more inclined to try and do a deal like the Doctor. So those are all sort of things to kind of bring the drama alive, I think, and also keep the viewer interested.
And if you'll allow me just a quick comment as well, I think a lot of the things from back in the day we might not realize how political they are nowadays because we're sort of detached from the political climate of the time. But even a lot of those stories in the 70s had extreme political significance. I mean, if you look at like the thing with the Silurians, how the Doctor is just so constantly trying to maintain good rapport with both sides, even though there's violence been committed on both sides. You know, pointing out what's the difference between wanton slaughter and what's the difference between self-defense. Those things are highly politically relevant for all ages, but specifically if you look up a lot of those older stories, you know, the political climate of the time is highly relevant, and things might jump out at you that you might not have realized the first time you watch them.
Yes, I mean, I'm just getting a quick look at my notes here, and then the Silurians, when he's meeting with the elder Silurian, he said someone has to make a move, otherwise this whole thing will end up in complete catastrophe, which, as you know, is in the end what happens. So not with his agreement, but the Brigadier blows them all up.
So, Michael, you were saying about Malcolm being under surveillance with MI5. Do you think he ever knew he was being under surveillance by MI5?
Yeah,
and
right.
do you think that had any effects on his writing with the Avengers?
I don't, as far as I know, like I can't be 100%, but I don't think he was aware of it. I think most of the people were aware of how heavily monitored they were by the MI5 and Special Branch, because they weren't doing anything illegal. They weren't storing arms or planning to seize the House of Parliament. They were just going to a lot of meetings, some interesting, some less so, and selling the Daily Worker.
Right.
I don't think they regarded their activities as particularly subversive in that sense. So what was the second part of your question?
I was going to say whether or not that affected if he did know about it or knew what was going on, whether or not that affected his writing with the Avengers.
Yeah, no, I don't think. As I say, I don't think it did. And I suppose the Avengers is often about deceit. I suppose about the things that are going on aren't necessarily what you're being told. I suppose there's often a sort of I think the classic kind of Avengers thing is about this appears to be a kind of ordinary organization, like in the Mauritius Penny, you've got stamp collecting as the cover for a kind of fascist coup. So it's bringing together two very different kind of worlds. And again, in Trojan Horse, you've got stables, racing stables, being again a cover for an assassination bureau.
Yeah.
So it's like they kind of take these ordinary things, not very exciting, and then within that there's things going on which gradually come to light in the course of 45 minutes. But the thing that Richard said to me was when they were writing, we got on very well. I mean, he says that he was kind of like a public school boy, quite rigged, and he was Malcolm's sort of working class kind of communist, but they got on very well in creating the Avengers. And
that's good.
The first thing they did was generally work out the first act, because the Avengers has 3 acts, 15 minutes, 20 or so, and they usually at the end of the first act someone gets killed off, so they would kind of work out who was going to be killed off and why in the first act, and then it would kind of fall into place.
And for the audience in the US who don't know what MI5 is, in the UK we have MI5 and MI6, which is equivalent to the CIA and FBI. We just call them different. We're just intelligence agencies.
Yeah, it's for many years the government's denied they existed.
Yeah,
and very reluctant to disclose anything. But nowadays we know who's head of them, and they go on TV and talk about it sometimes. So. And they have websites, and you can contact them.
Now we just go hi, and they wave back to us. It's like hi.
I was reluctant to be the yank that asked the question about MI5. I was waiting for someone else.
But that's what I thought. I thought I might as well just explain it.
Thank you for not making me expose the fact that I was getting the gist, but
yeah, we're much more familiar with MI6 because of the spying craftish.
Yeah, the sort of MI5 is internal and MI6 is external. Sort of, they're kind of fictionalized in John le Carré's novels in the 60s, but they're kind of where he calls it the circus. I think they're based around Cambridge Circus in London. No, the MI6 has got this huge building on the Thames, which
they have
hard to miss.
Yeah, Timescales was saying that we're all being monitored by them right now.
Yeah, we just go hi. Hi.
Yeah, hi.
Yeah, we've said it enough times that we're definitely on the stream.
Yeah,
Right now.
I'm very grateful to him.
You say it 3 times in a row, and it pops up like Bloody Mary.
In the mirror, yeah. It's like
I wonder if that happened. I wonder if that works for Christian too.
Yeah, right.
What?
Don't
Christian.
invoke him.
Christian. Ah!
Ah!
He's here.
And he's muted.
He's in the
He's
dark.
muted, yeah.
So certainly I like to pay tribute to MI5 because without them I wouldn't have been able to write the book in such a detailed way, really. And the other thing I forgot to mention was that he was a very prolific writer of letters, and his landlady was Betty Tate, who was also in the Communist Party. This is in the 50s. He was living in Hampstead, which is quite a rundown area there after the war. And he became quite friendly with Betty's daughter, Jean, who was a teenager, and was very interested in sort of Malcolm as a kind of writer and somebody who was different to all the adults she met. So they kind of stayed in contact. And then when Jean was working in Africa, in the Nigeria, I think it was in the 70s, Malcolm would write her a letter every week. And so he'd give a very detailed, over 2 years or so, like sort of vision of his life and his ups and downs. Because by then he was no longer writing for television. So he wrote for TV from 1958 through to 74 with the invasion of the dinosaurs. So that was the last Doctor Who he wrote.
Was he no longer being commissioned, or was he just tired of writing for television?
I think the people running the show changed. So as you probably know, Barry Letts and Terence Dix moved on. It was taken over by Robert Holmes and Philip Hinchcliffe as story editor and producer. And they obviously wanted their own writers and their own. They kind of changed how the show was, and took it in a different direction, which is fine. A lot of people are very big fans of that era, kind of gothic era. But Malcolm wasn't asked to write again. So from sort of 75 onwards, he's finding other ways to make money. One of which was to write Doctor Who novels. So Target had started up in 74, I think it was, early 74. So he wrote 6, or was it 7? I think it's 7 Doctor Who novels.
7, I think.
Which sold in huge numbers. I mean, because going back to that thing about there being no repeats. So if you're a Doctor Who fan and you wanted to kind of revisit the early years, then Target provided a way of doing that.
Target was massive in the 80s.
Yeah, so the reason why you can still pick up Malcolm's Target novels very easily, relatively cheaply, is because so many came out and they're still floating around the universe for sale. And he also used to write for a television soap, which, unless you're British, you would never heard of, called Crossroads, set in a motel in the Midlands, which is hugely popular, although much derided for its plot lines and fairly dodgy sets. But again, he wrote 4 Crossroads novels, which sold in very large numbers.
As a kid, I always used to get confused between Crossroads and Coronation Street.
One was in the Midlands and Coronation Street was set in the north. But yeah, they are very similar in the sense of endless kind of characters and endless plot lines. Some more probable than others. But it was a kind of regular writing stint he wrote huge numbers of episodes for Crossroads. So again, it was a way of making money, because as a writer, you're always looking for the next job, aren't you?
Were those Doctor Who novels, were those strictly novelizations, or were any of those original works?
No, they're all based on the TV scripts, but they are far from just a kind of run through of the scripts. I mean, Malcolm kind of changed them around things. Excuse me. So he like sort of introduced, I think, whereas in the TV version, the Joe Grant pops up at the beginning of the Autumn one, doesn't she? But I think she's introduced in a different way in one of the novels, Colony in Space, I think. So yeah, he kind of changed things around and altered sort of episodes and introduced. He gives them a lot of backstory. So it's not just what you see on television, but also quite a lot of additional material. So even quite small characters are given a kind of backstory, or introduced as characters that weren't in the original team, like the colonies, the Invasion of the Dinosaurs introduced a character who comes down from London to I think he's going down to watch football, comes down from Glasgow, they get a bit drunk. When he wakes up, all his friends are gone, and then discovers London's been taken over by dinosaurs, one of which unfortunately kills him. so the character is robbed out, but he's not in the original version, but Malcolm felt he wanted to try and find a way, I suppose, of showing you an empty London.
Mm-hmm. And that's so fun about novels, just getting to see certain things fleshed out that were maybe only on the screen for a few seconds. It provides a more complete story, and I think like that's, in a lot of ways, I think that's even more challenging than writing an original story. Just working with something that's already in a script and in an episode, but adding your own flair to it in a way that's consistent.
Yes.
Yeah, I thought I lost you guys for a second.
Suddenly, we were all just in.
Why did you mute me, you freak?
I think, and while we've got a bit of a quiet bit, I mean, in the Green Death, one of the characters is one of the hideous, gruesome maggots. So it's a bit where he sort of says about how the maggot lay exhausted from its efforts, and it sniffed sharply, experiencing a new source of energy, oxygen in the air. It wriggled its little body and realised it was quite strong. So he's kind of giving a whole character there to a maggot.
And similar to a maggot.
Michael, it's Christian. I'm glad I get to meet you, but Dave just threw me in the production corner. Can you get me out of here?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Free the TARDIS one.
Free the TARDIS one. And I had a bunch of questions for you, but I was listening to the show while I was, maybe doing some other activity, and everybody took my questions. So I'm like, everybody hit them all up there. One of the questions I had is, where can people find to purchase your book? Because I found Lulu. I was going to put in is that a location where?
Yes, that's the only place you can buy it online.
Okay, so the Lulu shop works?
Yeah, go to lulu.com and stick in Malcolm Hulke into the shop.
I'm going to put the whole link in there so people can paste and copy.
Yeah, so it's a kind of printing platform basically. So when people buy it, then they print one off and send it to the people, the person who bought it. So it doesn't cost anything to do. You don't have any printing costs as an author. Yeah, that's right. So it's a way of getting you, but obviously you need someone to design it, which Martin did an excellent job of in creating a very visual front cover as well, which we wrestled with, but finally came out with a version that we were happy with. We wanted it to be kind of bright and eye-catching. I think Martin succeeded very well in doing that.
Is there anything that maybe people weren't aware of Malcolm as he was working on Doctor Who that you want to address? I know you have the book, but are there things that our audience may not be familiar with of Malcolm that they might be interested?
That's a good question. I think the length of time it took to create each show, I think. I mean, that as I said which I recommend people try and get hold of, the making of Doctor Who, which copies are still available, which describes the process of creating the Sea Devils, how it went through a sort of initial meeting, and then we go away, and then you come up with a version of it, and then you give it to the producer or director, and also the sort of many sort of twists and turns there are between sort of the initial and the final broadcast, because it's always a balance between budgets as well. I mean, Doctor Who never seemed to have had enough money, so if they could skimp by losing a character or losing some scenes, or do you really need to show that? Can't we just get someone to mention that in passing? So there's always a huge amount of toing and froing, I think, between. You need a good story editor who supports the writers, whereas the producer is saying, well, we can't really afford that. Can you cut down the 7 day to outdoor shooting to 5 because we've run out of budget? So there's a huge amount of sort of stuff we don't know about. There's probably endless memos in the BBC archives about this, which someone with more energy than me can read, can create I recommend Simon Gurrier's book about David Whittaker, which looks at a lot of those internal memos. So that's one thing. TV was, in some sense, when he left TV, it was a lot easier because as a writer, he was producing novels and he would just write the novel. And I get the feeling he took it to the publishers and they went, yeah, great, we'll bang it out next week. So it's probably a lot less stressful. And
do you know if he had a favorite story that he wrote amongst the other Doctor Who's, one that he was very passionate about? Or
yeah, I'm not sure.
did he have one that he had a little more trouble with writing?
I think as I said, we mentioned the Ambassador of Death who was brought in to rescue, so that's one of the ones which was problematic for them. It does kind of mention, I think, in some of them, which somebody's right. What some of his favourite ones? We'll have a quick flick through while you think of another question.
No, that's fine. I just remember the Ambassadors of Death when I was growing up because I just remember the rocket scene where it was a tape recorder inside. Spoilers for anybody who hasn't watched, since 1970s. But I just love the scene where John Pertwee is standing outside and he's talking to the rocket and he finally figures it out and goes, right, cut it open.
Best cliffhanger ever.
That's cliffhanger.
I think one of my favourite favorites. Well, I think the War Games, I think, is a masterpiece because it's astonishing that they did a series which lasts 10 episodes. I mean, obviously, of the 4-episode one, we do not speak, but the 10-episode one is kind of brilliant, I think, because of the way they keep the action going. And just when you think something's not going to happen, something else does happen. So it's kind of relentlessly moving forward.
How many games did they have? How many stories did they originally have, and how many did they eventually end up having?
In terms of, sorry, you lost me somewhere.
In the War Games, I think they only had a certain amount of War Games, and then they had to keep adding to that. That's right.
Yeah, I think they had a gap of they had a sort of 4-episode serial and a 6-episode serial, and they were both lost or rejected. And someone's given a nice plug on the timescales. So they then had 10 episodes. I think by the time they were finishing the 10th episode, they were already at the point of shooting the 1st episode. So it was a very tight schedule, but they got there in the end. Just having a quick look through to sort of get it. One of the things that's sad is that obviously Malcolm died before the advent of what you might call mass Doctor Who. Just sort of fandom. So in the 70s, there were sort of small fanzines emerged in the sort of 74, 75 period. There were hundreds of them. I recommend it. It's a very good book about Doctor Who fandom, which Telos put out. But obviously he died in 79, so there's no film of him talking about Doctor Who. There's just one recording, which was done in March 79 by Gary Hopkins, who went down from Wales to interview him. There were a couple of people who went down to interview him for some of the magazines, so there's written interviews with him, but only one actual recording of him speaking, which is sad, really. Just looking at Colony in Space, and Malcolm said in an interview that the BBC said they'd got a load of spaceships cheaply, model spaceships, I mean. So they said, can you make a story about them? So he says that's on occasion there are others where the problems to resolve are posed for me.
That's how it works. And we have some old props. Can you make a story about this?
I love that about classic
problems have to be solved by drawing on shared creative imagination, and you have to think what makes this story different, because with science fiction, as with crime and any other genre, there are so many ideas, and all the writers can do is keep shuffling like a pack of cards. Which is very much kind of inspired by the Cold War, I think, Frontier in Space.
Okay, guys, that settles it. Any of our new episodes that we got, we're going to go into my garage. We're going to start pulling stuff out, and that's how we're going to base our new episodes of this show. That's how we're going to do it.
Excellent.
That sounds like a cool idea.
Dave, Christian, do you...
go ahead.
Sorry, Candyman.
No.
Yeah.
Do you guys mind if I ask? I was just going to ask a mini question that was a follow-up to something we mentioned earlier. Is that all right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so what I wanted to ask is, earlier when I mentioned that you can find more things because we're sort of detached from the cultural climate at the time that the episodes were written, and we might not realize how they were referencing things from the culture. I had actually meant to ask you if you agreed with that. I hadn't meant to present it like, this is what I think. I meant to ask you, I just didn't word it very well, but I had meant to ask you if you thought that was a fair assessment, that a lot of things from the time were a lot more referential to the culture than we might realize nowadays because of the time, particularly with the episodes that Malcolm wrote.
I think that's very true. Obviously, because obviously they were produced in Britain, so things that were going on in Britain at the time. I mentioned, issues around race from the sort of 68 period onwards, but also the Cold War, which we, well, I say we all remember, but obviously younger people don't. But that was the backdrop, of my childhood, the conflict between Russia and America and the threat of nuclear war, which almost came true. And I was too small to realise, but in October '62, the nuclear war almost happened, and there were other conflicts which appeared to danger of spiralling out of control. So that backdrop of a world split between two opposing powers just seemed to be a given, and was the background in which people kind of created, a lot of the fiction and that kind of, I mentioned John le Carré, but there's endless, the James Bond stuff and many other kind of spy ones, but also influenced science fiction as well. The idea of taking a conflict that's very much in the backdrop of colony in space, and the two opposing powers, imperial powers, the Earthmen and the Draconians. But if you didn't know about the Cold War, you might not realize that, as our colleague was saying. And also the environment is quite a big thing in the 70s. So the environmental issues, which, although he didn't write it, Malcolm did the target version of The Green Death.
Right.
Those environmental issues. Also featured in Dinosaurs in Space as well. Sorry, Dinosaurs, Invasion of the Dinosaurs. Dinosaurs in Space, that's how good. Invasion of the
Dinosaurs.
Write
that one too.
So he says that, let's see. Yeah, there's the kind of quote, isn't there, at the end of the Dinosaurs one about, so it's not the oil and the filth that's the real cause of pollution, Brigadier, it's simply greed. So he is making quite a strong political and environmental point there, I think.
Definitely. And on that point, I know we've gone a little bit over the hour that we promised you. So we should probably start winding this down for today. Although we're going to be able to, people can kind of follow up on this conversation. I know on Sunday you're going to be appearing on Spill the Geek Tea.
Oh yes.
So that was Timescales who popped in the comments, and Spill the Geek Tea here is Tom as well in the comment section. So we'll be able to, people who are really interested in that can tune in.
It'd be like the Silurians and the Sea Devils, won't it? Be like sort of continuation.
A little bit. They are our sister show. I'm often on it. I'm not available this weekend. Candyman will be there, so you'll see some familiar faces.
All right, that's okay.
On Sunday, so people can continue and learn more about you and Malcolm Hulke and your book on Sunday. But where can we'll go through and kind of give everyone else some promo time. Sean, where can we find you?
You can find me on YouTube at Our Philosophy Is. I have just started a series where I'm intending to go through every Troughton story and review it. And boy, do I have my work cut out for me. But so far, I've got a whopping 1 done. But I am going to be going through all of them. You can find me, like I said, Our Philosophy Is. I have the rainbow logo, which reminds me, I want to tell everyone Happy Pride Month because it is June. And I'm going to keep doing Doctor Who content, so if that interests you, you can follow me over there.
Excellent. And Michelle, where do we find you?
You can find me on Facebook, Michelle L. Hamilton, author, and coming out next month, July 22nd, is my first young adult book, Ghostly Tales of Fredericksburg. My publisher had me adapt my Haunted Fredericksburg for children.
Excellent. And that's next month.
Yeah, July 22nd. That's why I've been kind of quiet for a while, because I was getting that done really quickly. They wanted a fast turnaround.
Exciting. And Candyman, where can we find you?
You can find me. Oh, sorry. You can find me here at the Legend of Traveling TARDIS. You can also find me over at Spill the Geek Tea, where we just go completely off topic. because that's what we do. I don't know how we ended up talking about Star Wars and DJing on the same show, but that's all about Spill the Geek Tea.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. And of course, for me, you can find me here on the Legend of the Traveling TARDIS, often on Spill the Geek Tea. You can find me at youtube.com/TheRatHole.ca for all my gaming stuff. I'm going to be taking a little bit of time over July where I'm not quite available to do a lot of stuff online, so you won't see me as much of me. But we've also got my new show, Happiness Patrol, and you can find that at you can see that in my little signature there, youtube.com/@Happiness Patrol Show. The second episode drops on the 3rd of July, so in a couple of quick weeks here. We've got some preview shorts coming out over the next few weeks of that, and you can see all of the cool stuff there. And of course, last but certainly not least, Mr. Michael Herbert, where can we find all of your you? all of your you.
I think I sort of can't really compete with all the multi-dimensional appearances that my colleagues are making.
I just got word from MI5. It's what is your mailing address and where are the weakest points of your house?
I've got two places actually. People are interested. One is a blog which is devoted to radical history called Red Flag Walks. So if it's on WordPress, so it kind of pops up fairly. I've got various writings on there. I've done quite a lot of work on the history of radical women in Britain. So I've written books about that. So there's stuff on there about women in the 19th century. But also quite a lot about women's liberation in the 70s. I do twice a year, I do a sort of lecture course on radical women in the 19th and 20th century. And then the other blog I write is called Fantasies of Possibility, which is a science fiction blog. That's a quote from H.G. Wells, who more or less single-handedly invented science fiction. And we live very much in his shadow, and John Wyndham and others. So that looks at classic science fiction. I think I've written about 60 posts. I've run out of steam of it recently. But it kind of looks at things like John Wyndham, and other writers as well, H.G. Wells. So if people are interested in a wider look at science fiction as a genre, then recommend that one. And also some forgotten some TV shows like Time Slip and Changes and other kind of classic television series, because there's a lot more science fiction around in the 70s than people remember. It wasn't just Doctor Who.
Michael, I'm sorry. If somebody asks, I apologize, but who are your favorite writers? Who influenced you? Somebody, if they ask.
I suppose I grew up on things like John Wyndham. And when I spent a lot of time at home as a child, because I used to suffer from polio. Sorry, I had polio and then I had asthma. So I spent a lot of time at home with asthma. So I read a lot. So I used to read lots of science fiction, published by Victor Gollancz, which are in yellow covers in the 60s and 70s. So they were easy to pick out of the library. So I read lots of Andre Norton, quite an influential. Paul Anderson, his time, recommend his Guardians of Time series. People haven't read it, which plays with lots of notions around how history can be changed, how it can be changed back. So yeah, and also then there's a wave of women writers in the 70s like Ursula Le Guin and Vonda McIntyre.
And Kristen, so we just had Space Coast Comic-Con. I mentioned at the beginning that you sold out of all of the barbecue sauce that we had.
Yes,
there, which was great. Where else are we going to be over the next few weeks and months?
I'm glad you asked, because I'm about to make an announcement, and we are wrapping up the details about that. But yeah, we had like 12 bottles. And first of all, I want to thank Space Coast Comic-Con. I want to thank Jake and all of his volunteers and team over there. David, they were wonderful to us. We actually sold the barbecue. We sold out. And even with, and this is not criticizing, this is just because it was a fact. We did see a drop in attendance because of the protests. Everybody were out doing the protests. So we didn't get as many people as we wanted to, but they did come back in on Sunday. And we welcomed everybody who showed up over here. But yeah, we sold out of the barbecue sauce, so I'm going to make an announcement as of this moment. On July 19th, we're going to finalize it. Where's my picture? The Daleks of Florida and the Traveling TARDIS will be united over at Famous Faces and Funnies. So get your cosplays out, dust them all out there, because the Daleks are going to be invading that store, and it is a huge store. It is, man, I walked around in it. It's almost like an airplane hangar. This thing is huge. I mean, every comic book that you can possibly think of is over there. Not only that, but we're going to have discounted, Rick over there, Rick Shea, who runs the place, is going to have discounted rates on all magazines and books, Doctor Who related over there. So you definitely want to check it out. Get some good merch while you're out there, and the Daleks will be out there as well. So want to thank them big time out there. And big thank you again to Space Coast Comic Con. Just some images of, we started a new traveling thing. This is Chewie. And you're going to see Chewie around the conventions now, and that's who's going to be. But we just had a wonderful time and some wonderful pictures out there. So we want to give big thanks to Jake and all the team out there for letting us come in, letting us geek out. And I actually got to hold a podcast panel at the end of Sunday, and had a bit of a showing. So July 19th, for those of you in the Central Florida and Melbourne area, please mark that on your calendar, because we're going to have the Daleks invading. And its working title right now is Day with the Daleks. So, and of course, over on September 12th through the 14th, the World Golf Village Renaissance Resort, you definitely want to get your rooms checked out, because I hear the rooms are being sold out. The tickets are also selling out as well. I think their VIP pass has been sold out. In St. Augustine, Florida, ancient city. Again, the Dalek builders and we will be together, united, on a Whovian front out there as well. So if you miss the Daleks over at Famous Faces and Funnies, they'll definitely be there at Ancient City Con. Get your tickets now at ancientcitycon.com. And I think I've said enough. Michael, I don't want to hold you out there more. I mean, if you got to run, you got to run. I totally understand that. I want to thank you so much. I'm sorry I wasn't here on time for it, but I'm glad I got to see you out there. And I'm going to let, well, he's out. So, guys, any final words before we wrap it up?
What word?
No, he's like, bye, out of here.
Yeah, I was about to give him the last word and said, did you have any final words? Michael, pump, he's gone. Hey, that's how it works sometimes. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Don't forget to, did you have any final words, Dave, before I let you go?
No, I think we had a great show. Thank you guys, everybody, for joining me. And poof.
Yeah.
Like I said, you can find out more about Michael Herbert on Sunday on Spill the Geek Tea at the same 5:00 Eastern time that today's episode was. So you can check that out. And other than that, let's say goodnight to Simon and take it away, Tony.
Yeah. Got it. And don't forget to say goodnight to Rose.
Good night, Rose.
She looks surprised. Like, what?
This is how the show ends. So, yes, don't forget to say goodnight to Simon. Oh, please tell me we still have his picture. Oh, okay, good. We just got so much technical. You don't know how much stuff that StreamYard's been upgrading. It's just been a nightmare. And they don't tell anybody. It's just like you find out one day and just like, oh, here it is. So everybody say goodnight to Rose. Good night, Simon. Thank you so much. Next week, have no idea what we're going to be doing, but just keep an eye out for it. And thank you all so much for joining us. Again, please stay safe. Until the next adventure, Tony, take us out.